You know, sometimes to really get to the heart of something, like the Book of James, you've got to start somewhere completely different. Today, we're diving into a real life mystery. We're talking about an ancient relic, a secret society, and what could be a battle for the very soul of history itself. So let's get into it. Okay, so our story really kicks off with this thing, the Shroud of Turin. What is it? Well, it's this massive 14-foot-long piece of linen cloth. And on it, there's this haunting, almost photographic negative image of a man who was clearly crucified. For hundreds of years, millions of people have been convinced this is it, the actual burial shroud of Jesus Christ. But on the flip side, you've got skeptics who have been saying for just as long that it's nothing more than the most brilliant, most clever forgery in human history. And this is where things get really interesting, because science is basically at a stalemate. Look at this. Back in 1978, a whole battery of tests came back with mind-blowing results. The image has 3D properties, which is just weird. The blood on it, it's real human blood from someone who died under serious trauma. And nobody could figure out how it was made. No known artistic technique could replicate it. So it looked authentic, right? Well, hold on. A decade later, they do radiocarbon dating and boom, total curveball. The tests place the cloth's origins sometime between 1260 and 1390. That makes it about 700 years old, not 2000. So, a medieval creation. So what do you do with that? This is where the rabbit hole gets deep. What if both sides are kind of right? What if the carbon date is spot on and it is from the Middle Ages, but it's still an authentic burial shroud of a man who was crucified, just not Jesus of Nazareth? And that single question, that possibility, well, that's what cracks open the door to one of the most sprawling conspiracy theories out there. And this theory leads us straight into a wild alternate history, one that connects the Shroud to maybe the most famous and mysterious secret society of all time, the Knights Templar. So here's the core of the theory. The man on the shroud, it's not Jesus. It's supposedly Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. The story goes that in 1314, before he was burned at the stake, he was crucified in a cruel mockery of Christ's death. And think about that date, 1314. That fits perfectly inside the window from the carbon dating. Now, to really get why this theory even exists, you need a quick rundown on the Templars themselves. They were founded way back in 1119. The legend is they spent 9 years excavating under Herod's temple and came out with something. Because afterward, they became incredibly rich and powerful, like overnight. But then came Friday, October 13th, 1307. Yep, that Friday the 13th. The King of France had them all arrested, the order was crushed, and their legendary treasure, well, it was never, ever found. It just vanished. Okay, and this is where it all ties together into a much bigger conspiracy. The theory claims there weren't one, but two Christianities. You had the real version, led by Jesus' own brother James. The secrets of this church were supposedly found and guarded by the Templars. Then you have the other version, the Pauline Church. This theory says it was basically a political invention by the Apostle Paul, who they see as an intruder. And his version is the one that ended up becoming the dominant form of Christianity we all know today. All right, so we've got this wild Templar theory on the table, but now we're going to pivot, and it's a big one. Because the source material offers this really powerful counter-argument. And it's not just aimed at this one conspiracy theory. It's aimed at our whole obsession with physical things, with relics like the Shroud. And to make its point, it pulls out an ancient story that's a serious warning. Okay, let's rewind way back to the Book of Numbers. Picture this. The Israelites are wandering in the desert and they're getting bitten by these venomous snakes. It's a crisis. So God tells Moses, forge a serpent out of bronze and put it up on a pole. The instructions were super simple. If you get bitten, all you have to do is look at that bronze serpent and you'll be healed. You'll live. So it was this object created by God's command to be a focus point for faith and for healing. And this wasn't just some obscure one-off story. It was so important that Jesus himself brought it up. He's talking to a religious leader named Nicodemus, and he says, hey, remember how Moses lifted up that serpent in the wilderness? Well, that's what has to happen to the Son of Man. He's making a direct comparison. That act of looking at the serpent to be saved, he says that's exactly like believing in him and his crucifixion for eternal life. But, and this is the critical lesson, fast forward a few hundred years. That exact same bronze serpent, we're talking an authentic, historical, God-approved relic, it's still around. But now the people aren't just looking at it for healing.
They've started worshiping it. They're literally burning incense to the thing itself. So when the good King Hezekiah comes along, what does he do with this priceless historical artifact? He smashes it into a million pieces. And the point is so powerful. Even something real, something legitimate, can become a dangerous idol the moment it starts distracting us from God himself.
And that whole story brings us right back to where we started, the Book of James. Because after all this talk about relics, conspiracies, and secret histories, the real question, the one that actually matters, is this. What does real saving faith even look like? Well, James actually breaks it down for us into 3 different kinds of faith. First up, you've got what he calls dead faith. This is just talk. It's saying, I believe, but not having it change a single thing about how you live. Then there's demonic faith. This one's interesting. It's pure intellectual belief. The source makes a great point here. There's not a single demon in the universe who's an atheist. They know God is real. They even tremble. But are they saved? Of course not. So finally we get to dynamic faith. This is the real deal. It involves your whole person, your mind, your heart, your will, and it's proven, it's shown to be real by your actions.
So this gets to the core of what James is trying to say. True faith is not about believing something despite the evidence. That's just being irrational. No, he's saying true faith is obeying despite the consequences. You see the difference? It's about acting on what you believe no matter what it costs you personally. It's a faith of action, not just mental agreement.
And there's this fantastic quote from the theologian John Calvin that just sums it all up perfectly. It is faith alone that justifies, but the faith that justifies is never alone. You get that? Your actions, your works, they don't save you, but they are the absolute, inevitable evidence that you have a real, living, dynamic faith. Okay, so if our faith shouldn't be in relics, where should it be? Well, to push back against these big revisionist histories like the Templar conspiracy, the source points us back to the text of the Bible itself. The claim is that there's a kind of supernatural fingerprint woven right into the fabric of the word. And the argument focuses on one specific place, Isaiah 53. Now, this is a passage in the Old Testament, written centuries before Jesus, but it describes the crucifixion in jaw-dropping detail. And here's the claim. Within those 15 verses, hidden in the original Hebrew, are 40 different names encoded using something called equidistant letter sequences. It's basically a method of finding hidden messages by skipping letters at a regular interval. So you might read every 10th letter or every 50th letter to spell out a new word. And we're not talking about generic names here. Get this, the list is basically a who's who of the crucifixion story. You've got Pilate, Caesar, the high priests, Caiaphas, and Annas. They're all supposedly in there. Then there are the disciples who were at the cross. Peter, John, Andrew, Philip, Thomas. And maybe the wildest part? The name James supposedly shows up twice, which would correspond to the 2 different Jameses who were there at the cross. The whole argument is that this kind of specific detail, encoded hundreds of years in advance, has to be a sign of supernatural design. So, after all that, a mysterious shroud, a massive conspiracy theory, and claims of hidden codes, what are we left with? It all boils down to one big, provocative question. Where does true faith actually lie? Is it in an ancient relic that you can see and touch? Is it in some secret history passed down through the ages? Or is it found in the words written on a page?